Hey everybody, I'm up here in Franklin, Tennessee to learn about a guy named Abram Maury. Now, when I was thinking about this show and the things that I wanted to talk about, I thought it'd be really good to talk about some of the basics. And Maury County is actually named after Abram Maury. So I'm up here talking to my friend Chip, who's a local historian, expert on the Maury family, to learn more about Abram Maury, who he was, and why Maury County is named after him. Now, Chip, I actually want to start with something that might get me in a little bit of trouble. So, Maury County is named after Abram Maury.
Yes. Yeah, I get asked this so many times.
And I'm going to mess it up so many times.
Oh, and I do too. And as I've studied the family pronounces it Maury, but the county pronounces it Maury. And I don't know why or how that happened. I was on the Maury County Historical Society board for a few years, and I went along with it and called it Maury. But yeah, the family calls it Maury, and as we just talked about, there are a lot of Maury descendants still in the area, and they're pretty funny about the late Virginia Bowman was a Maury descendant. And she came to see me speak one time, and I was a nervous wreck when I saw her in the audience because she was the longtime Williamson County historian. The first thing she said after my talk, she came right up to me and she said, "Thank you for pronouncing her name correctly." So, but it can be a touchy subject.
All right, well, we'll see if I can keep this straight throughout our conversation.
Okay.
Maury County named after Abram Maury. I'm going to try really hard.
Right.
Can't promise I'm going to get 100%, but
Right.
I'm going to try. Well, so what can you tell us about Abram Maury? I know that he moved to Middle Tennessee from Virginia.
Right.
Very early.
Right. Well, the first thing to know about Abram Maury and the Fontaine Maury family, and later I'm sure we can get a shot of it, there's a Huguenot marker placed at Abram's grave a few years ago. They're descendants of French Huguenots, which the Huguenots were French Protestants. And in, I believe it was 1685, Louis XIV revoked the Edict of Nantes, which took away the rights of French Protestants. Huguenot churches were ordered destroyed, Protestant schools were ordered destroyed, and upwards of almost 1 million Huguenots fled France after Louis XIV repealed that, the Edict of Nantes. And so Abram Maury's great-grandfather was the Reverend Jacques Fontaine, and he landed in Dublin, Ireland, where he settled after the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. And he wrote a very famous memoir, and he left it for the next generations of Fontaine Maurys to come. And that was, Abram took that very seriously. And yeah, so when he came here, he kept that in mind. And I think he left Virginia. I think he had that spirit of the Fontaine Maurys of exploration and wanted to head to a new world. This was sometimes called the Wilderness, the Western District, in the Cherokee country.
Yeah.
And I think it called to him.
Okay. And so what year was this?
This was around 1797.
Okay.
When he purchased over 600 acres from Major Anthony Sharp.
We're here in a neighborhood right now. I mean,
Right.
We're actually in somebody's backyard.
Right.
In the Maury Family Cemetery.
Right.
In Franklin.
Right.
And this is the Founder's Point neighborhood. And one thing that I think is interesting about Abram Maury is, we're up here because he's the namesake of Maury County, but he's actually really instrumental in founding the city of Franklin too, right?
Right, absolutely. He was much more involved with Franklin and Williamson County than Maury County. And Maury County was established in 1807 to honor Abram for the work he had done in this area. But yes, by far his life was here. His life was Franklin. When he first got here, he wanted to call the town Marthasville after his wife, and she was a very modest lady, and she asked him not to do that. So they named it Franklin after Benjamin Franklin.
Can you imagine if it was called Marthasville?
No, I can't imagine
It
that.
doesn't have quite the ring to it.
Yeah, it's not as quaint, you know. It's Franklin works out well.
That is a really nice name for a town.
It is. It is. But yes, this was Abram's life, and he loved Franklin because of his Huguenot ancestry. He was very much into education. He wanted education for boys and girls, and in 1806 the Maury Academy was established in East Tennessee in Jefferson County, and it's still there in the form today of Maury Middle School, which a lot of people don't know, but that's a very nice legacy, and I think that'd be one that he would still be very proud of. When he was here, he started a Bible study for boys and girls, Sunday school, and a Bible study for the adults. It was non-denominational, and I think that goes back to the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. He was very much into letting people sort of be themselves, and which was a good quality to have.
Certainly.
Yeah, but yes, this Franklin was his life, his passion, and he donated the land for the square, built a Methodist church for the town, and was generally well beloved here in Franklin.
Yeah. So how did he make his money? I mean, obviously to come to Middle Tennessee, buy 600 acres of land, and then, be successful on that land. You said he's a land surveyor.
Yes, he was a surveyor. He was a farmer. And the Maury family in Virginia was a very wealthy family. As I said, his uncle was Reverend James Maury, and Reverend James Maury ran a school outside Charlottesville called the Maury School for Boys, and his three most famous students were Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe.
Somewhat famous.
Right. So Reverend Maury.
I've heard of them.
Right. And so the Maurys, the Fontaine Maurys, were a founding family, and we were talking about Liverpool earlier. Abram Maury's first cousin was Consul James Maury, one of Reverend Maury's sons, and Consul James Maury in 1790 was named Consul of Liverpool by President George Washington and Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, because he'd grown up with Jefferson. Jefferson lived with the Maurys for 2 years.
Okay.
So Consul Maury spent 40 years in Liverpool, England. And of course, that's a whole nother story that gets into cotton.
Do we need to do another episode
We
on
do,
this?
because
Okay.
Liverpool, cotton, and the Confederacy, it's all intertwined, and it's a fascinating slice of history.
That actually really does sound like an interesting episode. And one thing that you will learn about me probably as this goes on is I'm a big Liverpool football fan. So I'm very interested to hear about these Liverpool connections, but we'll have to save that for a different time.
No, that will be yes. That's
Okay, so you mentioned that Maury County is named after Abram Maury for the work he had done in this area. Obviously he never lived in Maury County. So what was it specifically, do you know, really about Abram Maury that they decided to name it after him, and how did you feel about that?
I've never stumbled across anything about how I'm sure he was honored, I'm sure, and the Polk families, they all knew each other, so I'm sure he was very honored, but I've never run across anything specifically, stating he felt this way or that, but I'm sure he was very, very honored. And back then, they were probably, one in the same, but no, I've never run across anything specifically about Abram and how he felt about that.
So was he in the state legislature at the time? Is that right?
I believe he was, yes.
Okay.
Yes. And you asked me, I looked and tried to find some things that he did in the legislature, and it's difficult. He's the founding father of Franklin, but there's so little really known about him. You don't hear about him very much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found that it said Maury County was established by the 8th legislature in session in Knoxville on November 24th, 1807. It was named for Abram as a tribute for all he had done for the area. And then it said the Tennessee legislature appointed Abram and several others to select and purchase the sites of county seats for Weakley, Gibson, McNairy, Dyer, Hardeman, Albion, Tipton, and Haywood counties. Oh. So that's one thing committee he was on.
I mean, that's quite an influential thing to be involved in,
to be
deciding where the county seats
will be. Right. So he was involved with that.
Interesting. So we're here at his family cemetery, which means that, I mean, this is the property that he owned. This neighborhood was kind of all part of his holdings, is that right?
Right, as far as I understand.
And so, of course, unfortunately, his home's not here anymore, but we think it would have been somewhere close by. This is a family cemetery, and we'll pan around a little bit so you can kind of get an idea of where we're at.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, this is just, it's this little cemetery in the middle of a neighborhood, but, you know, but when he lived here, I mean, this would have been a farm, I guess.
Yeah, he was a farmer. I don't know what all he raised, but I know that he did have enslaved. They did have slaves. There's stories of his wife, Martha. She really struggled with her health quite a bit. She was bedridden quite a bit. There were stories of when he would be serving in the legislature and it would be away, she would be very fearful, and she told her slaves to warn her if Native Americans were near.
I'm excited because, you know, when we were getting ready to film, one of the neighbors came up and was telling us about the research she had done on the family, and that she actually had found a lot of the names of the enslaved people who were owned by the Maury family. And so, I mean, that would be a really interesting research project. And, you know, often you can trace through wills and things where these people went. And I know he died in 1825, so I'm not sure how many of the enslaved people who lived on this property would have still been alive during the Civil War to be emancipated at that point. But that would definitely be an interesting avenue to research. Well, is there anyone else interesting buried here in this cemetery that we should know about?
Oh, goodness.
A lot of?
There's a lot. Yes, there's a lot. When Abram died, his family just... The Fontaine Maury family is one of these families, it's like, how can it get any more interesting? But yet it does. And as I was telling you, I have over 1,000 original letters that I've collected over the past decade of the family. The neighbor over there that we just spoke with, she mentioned Dr. William Steptoe Reed, who's buried right over there. He went to West Point, and his roommate was Edgar Allan Poe. And so he married Sarah Maury, and she was Abram's granddaughter.
Okay.
But yeah, just stories like that. The Harris family was a very prominent family. Cary Harris Jr. is buried over there. He fought in the Civil War. He was a member of the Masonic Hall. And of course, A.P. Maury, the obelisk directly behind us, is Abram's son.
Okay.
He was a U.S. Congressman for Franklin. He was a Whig, anti-Jacksonian, and that's a whole nother story of how Andrew Jackson and the Maury family split.
What was Abram Maury doing? Abram Maury. What was he doing during the American Revolution?
It's sort of a black hole.
Interesting.
Yeah, it just sort of... I know that he married Martha in 1793, and that's really as far back as it really goes. But I've heard conflicting accounts of, you know, Major Abram Maury. Was it from the War of 1812, or was it from the Revolutionary War? He'd been a fairly young man in the Revolutionary War, because Lafayette was born in, I think, 59.
Okay.
And he was 19 when he came over.
It would be interesting to know, you know, was his family involved at all?
Right. No, I know that some of them were. The Maurys were very involved with the Revolutionary War. Consul James Maury was at the siege of Yorktown. as was his brother Fontaine Maury, was an aide-de-camp to Lafayette.
Oh.
So they were very much involved. But I can't stress enough how powerful the Fontaine Maury family was, and there in Virginia, Abram Maury's granduncle, John Fontaine, he arrived at Williamsburg, Virginia in 1715, and then he became good friends with Royal Governor Alexander Spotswood. So the Fontaine Maurys were there from the beginning, and kind of a forgotten founding family.
Yeah.
And I told you before, I've got Abram Maury's personal copy of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
Oh my gosh.
And I brought it.
You just brought it.
Yeah, I brought it, and because I thought it'd be interesting, because not many people know his uncle, Reverend Maury, taught Madison and Jefferson
Right.
when they were boys at the Maury School for Boys outside Charlottesville. And Abram obviously was very well aware of that and that legacy in his family. He was very proud of it.
Yeah.
And when that book came up for auction last year, I had to make a run for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is something that I love about studying local history, is that when you trace some of these families, I mean, you know, just talking about the Maury family, we're hitting the American Revolution. We really barely glanced at the Civil War, but
Right.
if you were to trace the history of this Maury family, many of whom are buried right here in a neighborhood in Franklin,
Right.
you can learn so much about American history.
Absolutely. And that's what I love about the show you're doing, because it's like it's right in somebody's backyard.
Yeah, I mean, this is literally, I mean, we're called Middle Tennessee Backyard History.
Right.
And we are actually in somebody's
Right.
backyard.
And we're
right
standing right here at the foot of the grave of the founder of Franklin,
Yeah.
whose uncle taught Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe.
now. Crazy.
And it is. And I look forward to showing you his personal
Yeah.
copy. He had a huge library in his home. As I said, it was originally called Poplar Grove.
Right.
When Abram passed, AP renamed it Tree Lawn.
Okay.
But Abram had a massive private library. And just to think that book was sitting on one
Yeah.
of those shelves in his home it still gives me chills.
Yeah. Well, Chip, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to
Yeah,
come
no
hang out
problem,
with
no
us and talk
problem
to us
at
today.
all, no problem.
I had a great time today up in Franklin talking with my friend Chip about the history of the Maury family. Today was such a great example of everything this show is about. We were in a cemetery in the middle of a neighborhood in Franklin, literally in somebody's backyard. People might drive by that cemetery every single day and not know that if you just went into that cemetery and learned more about the people who are buried there, you're going to learn about European immigration to North America. You're going to learn about the Civil War. You're going to learn about the American Revolution. You're going to learn about westward expansion. So many things just in that one little cemetery that's sitting in somebody's backyard in Franklin, Tennessee. I had a great time today. I hope you guys did too, and I'll see you again soon.